Mesech Zevachim Daf Mem Ches Hamar. We're starting from the top of the Yomit. Par v'Sel Shayim HaKippurim. We learned in the Mishnah it was slaughtered at Tzafin. In fact, the Ika of Din of Tzafin, that the Kachik Hachim were slaughtered b'Tzafin is Ba'elixim. It says Ba'ela. Like it says, and from there we learn out for the rest of the Kabbanis. So if so, we should have learned Eila first before Chatois. And for the Gemara, so because there did says Mefurish about Safein. And you want to Chatos, I did das Chatos, since it didn't Chatos, we learn out from Madasha, it's more beloved, like the Klal we find with the saying, I did ask him, and that's why he chose to say Chatos first. Let us first learn Chatos HaChitzenis before Chatos HaPnimi, because by the Chatos HaChitzenis, that's where the Dash was said. I did nichnas ledamam, since the blood of the Pasar Shayim HaKippurim was lifnim, was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's why he learned it first. And then he learns the other Chatos HaPnimi, where the blood was sprayed in the Heichel. And then after he learns the rest of the Chatos, where the blood was sprayed, Al Mizbeach HaChitzeh. What do we find? That by Eila was B'tzafein, after the Gemara, because it says finished by the Eila that comes, Minatzain Kevasei Eis, V'shachtos HaYeracham B'tzafein, it says. So you want to ask, can you find the in of Tzafin by Oila of Ben Sain? How about Oila of Ben Bakum and Ali? How do we know that the Shkita was done with Tzafin? Everything about Amakra, it says in the Pasik, in that same Pasik, Vayikal, and Pasik Yud, in the beginning of the Pasha by Oila Sain. Immediately after the Pasha Oila's Bakum, eat Minat Sain. It says, what about Ma'am, Maisim Ali Narisha. Those Vav in the beginning of the Pasuk comes to compare to the Pasha before. So we learn the Al-Yain, where it talks about Eilas Baka from the Tachtain, where it talks about Eilas Tzayin. Just like Eilas Tzayin, the Shechita was done, that's so Eilas Baka was done, but so the Shechita was about Tzafin. So this is only good according to Mandiyama Lamedin, that we learn the Al-Yain from the Tachtain. El-Lamandiyama Ein Lamedin Al-Yain that we don't learn the previous pasuk with the later pasuk. Ma'ik l'meimam. From where does he know that Eilas Baka needs shchita batzafein? And the Gemara Ve'im Nefesh, it says in the pasuk, Ve'im Nefesh v'geimem, we dash in the Vav Meisal in Yerishan to compare the Alyim to Tachtai. The Lechai Val Safik Mila is Hashem Tali, to teach us that even somebody who was a Safik, by Meila, he's chayv lahavi Hashem Tali. The din by Hashem Tali is normally by a person who's mesupik. If there were two chatich zabasa, one was a heter, one was a treif, and then he found out a chalif, and then he found out one of the he didn't know. Then he found out one of his chalif. So there he brings Hashem Tali, and it saves him from Yisurim until he finds out the exact, if he did the Aveda or not, and if he doesn't, he found that he did the Aveda, it would have to be a Chatas Vadei. That's a regular Chatas. Now we're talking about Safik Hashem Eilis. By Safik Hashem Eilis is Hashem Tali, L'mashal, he had in front of him Hekdesh v'Chulin, and he thought both were Chulin, and he had enough from one of them, and now he doesn't know if he had enough from the Hekdesh or the Chulin. So there too he has to bring up Hashem Tali, the Rabbi Akiva, Chum Peitim, by Safik Eilis, he's part from Hashem Tali. My Lapa HaKamitri, isn't there not that this is what they're arguing about? Mas of Lamaiden. One says you learn the El Yain from the Tachtain. That just like the Tachtain by a regular Hashem Tali, Safik Aveda, he has to bring Hashem Tali, so too by Mehilo. Mas of it. But the Chum say, Ein Lamaiden. We don't learn the El Yain from the Tachtain. And since the El Yain is talking about Mehila, we're not going to learn out from the Tachtain. So according to the Chachamim, who say that we don't learn out the El Yain from the Tachtain, so What do we know? Elas Baka is going to be chayiv to do with mitzvah. And our Papa the Kuli Yamal Amein. Our Papa says really everybody holds that we learn out from the Tachte. And by Asham Tali B'Safik Neile is right in time the Rabban. This is the reason Rabban Nemakan. By Asham Tali it says Lasham Mitzvahs. With them the Chatas Chaylev. By a couple Chatas that comes Alachis Chaylev also Mitzvahs. And we learn how to say the Shabbat between Chatas and Asham Tali. Malal and Davish Chayam Mal's Leinek Teres. Valshik Gasi Chatas. It's just like by a Chatas you're only going to be Chayiv. If it's something that makes you Chayiv Karas and Sheikh Chatas, Afkan also by Asham Tali, you bring Asham Tali only if it's Sheikh Mal's Leinek Karas. Valshik Gasi Chatas only if it makes it. He's Chayiv Karas and Sheikh is Chayiv Chatas. And you're correct. What would Rabbi Akiva? How would Rabbi Akiva learn out this limit from the Gezerah Shabbat that Asham Tali is not Shayiv but Safik Meiles? So, says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva learns out from this Gezerah Shabbat differently. He says Yechayiv by Safik Meiles because he doesn't learn the Dasha like the Chacham. He learns like this, Malal, just like by the Chatas, it's what kind of a kavua, and it doesn't change between Ash and Aini. It's not like Elohi Yedid, Avkam. So too by Dasham Tali is only the kavua has to be the one animal for whether it's rich or poor. Lafukiri Chatas the Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosh. It's coming to exclude somebody who entered into the Beis Hamikdash not knowing that he was tamei, or he ate something not knowing it was kodesh. The Elohi Yedidu, that there, if a person sinned, Betumis Mikdash v'Kadosh v'Shegi, he brings the Elohi Yedidu. It varies if he's a Asher or Ani. For Asher you bring a Behema, for Ani you bring a Mincha, in between is the turtle doves. So since there's no Chiyuv, Chat is Kavua, by Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosh, you don't bring on a Safik Asham Tali either. But when again Safik Meiles, we don't learn this from this Gezerah Shabbat to Patim from Asham Tali. The Gezerah Shabbat you need it for something else. To Patim Safik Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosh from Asham Tali. That's what you needed it. Rabbanan, how they're going to answer their words according Rabbanan, how they're going to answer according to the words of Rabbi Akiva. The Gezerah Shabbat was needed for something else, and not to tell you that by Meila, since there's no Karas B'Mezid, you're not Chayiv on a Safik Asham Tali. But according to Rabbi Akiva, you needed to exclude Chatas, the Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosh, that it's brought the carbon that it brings is Elohi Yedid. And the Gemara the Chacham will answer Gezerah Shabbat leMachzah. You don't have a Gezerah Shabbat leMachzah. You can't compare it only in one way. Just like the Gezerah Shabbat passes by Meila from Asham Tali. I'm sorry, passes Safik Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosh from Asham Tali, so too we can learn out from that Seder Shabbat to Pata also Safik Meilis from Asham Tali. In fact, you want to Rabbi Akiva Nami, Rabbi Akiva Bamas holds Seder Shabbat Lametza. So why doesn't he learn out from the Seder Shabbat to Pata Safik Meilis from Asham Tali? And you want to know Nami, really Seder Shabbat Lametza. And we should have learned out that it was by Meila. It should be pater from Asham Tali. Over here, this is what they're arguing about. Rabbi Akiva Amar Sava Be'im Nefesh Ksiv with a vav Meisali Narishain. He says there's a vav by Be'im to learn the Elyon from the Tachtain, that the Elyon which talks about Me'ilah will learn out from the Tachtain where the Yechayiv Kapmila by Achatos. And that will limit the Gezerah Shabbat that it will only be lemachza to pata you by Meila from Asham Tali. Rabbanan Nami Yaksivim Nefesh L'Chera According to Rachamim also says so let him also learn out that you should be chayiv Asham Tali by Saf Meiles. So Gemara tries to explain the machlekes. Should we say this is what they're arguing? The master of a hekesh adif. Rabbi Akiva says a hekesh overrides the Gzeira Shabbat. That's why the Gzeira Shabbat is limited. And by Me'ilis, it's going to be Pater from Hashem Tali, Ma'asaba. But the Chacham hold Gzeira Shabbat, the Gzeira Shabbat overrides the hekesh. And that's why we're not going to Pater by Me'ilah from Hashem. I'm sorry, that's why we're going to Pater Me'ilah from Hashem Tali, just like by Mikdash V'Kadasho. Says you want to like Kuli Alma, Hekesh Adif. Really, everybody holds that one minute, Gzeira Shabbat Adif, and that's why we learn now from the Gzeira Shabbat to Pater, and we don't learn Dash and the Hekesh of the Vav to be Mechayvin. There's one like the Kuli Yam and the Hekesh Adif. Everybody holds that the Hekesh overrides the Gzeira Shabbat, and we should have been Mechayiv by Safik Meilas Hashem Toli, and not learn out from the Gzeira Shabbat to Pater. Amri Loch, Rabbanon, nevertheless, Rabbanon say that we don't learn out from the Hekesh to be Mechayvim because the Hekesh was needed for something else. The Hekesh was learned Tachtein Hudagam Mehelian. They learned from the last case, from the earlier case, that La'asham, because of Shkolim, to teach the Asham Toli, has to be a minimum of 2 Shkolim, Slayim, L'chol HaPachis. Just like it's explicitly stated in the din of Asham Me'ilays, and we needed this Hekesh to teach us, not to say that the Safik Chet Chamor shouldn't be more money than Avadai. Ma'avadai, just like by Avadai Chet. Chatas Bazdanka, the Chatas is worth a sixth of a dinner of Sveike, so too, if it's a Safik, Hashem Toli has to be at least a Bazdanka. It has to be a sixth of a dinner. It doesn't have to be more. He could be more. So he says it's impossible that a carbon b'safik chet should be more chamer than a carbon chet vadei. That's why we needed a hekesh to teach us that it's not so. Only that the asham has to be worth lefachas 2 slayim. That the asham does have to be worth more. And so that's what we needed the hekesh for. So the Gemara al kapanim, since we needed the hekesh for that, so we don't learn out from the hekesh elyon from tachtein to be mechayv Hashem Tali by safik me'ilays. So since we don't have a limit from that, so we can learn out from the Gzeira Shabbat to Pater Hashem me'ilays from Hashem Tali. In fact, the Gemara of Rabbi Akiva that Ashens the Hekesh that we learn out El Yamitachtein to be Mechayv Hashem Tali b'Saf Me'ilas has what been Alei. Din Zeh that Hashem Tali has to be worth 2 slayim. What do we know? We don't learn it out from the Hekesh because that he needed it to tell you that by Saf Me'ilas Yechayv Hashem Tali says you want to not go on Mezes Teires Hashem. From the word Teiras, Teira Achas L'chol Hashamis, to teach us that all Hashamim are compared to one another. And since Hasham is 2 slayim, so we learn out for all the other Hashamis, and Hashem Tali included, that it has to be a worth of 2 slayim. Says Gemara Teirach, Mandi Slay Teiras. This is only answered according to the one that dashes the Hektish from the word Teiras. According to the man, the Ela man, the less late Teiras, but according to the one that doesn't dash Teiras, Meicha, from where does he know that Hashem Tali has to be at least worth 2 slayim? And the Gemara Gama Be'ekcha. He learns out from another Gzeira Shabbat. It says by the Hashem Ela Hashem Be'ekcha, and by Hashem Tali it says Ayel Tamim Natzeh Be'ekcha Hashem. So we learn out with a Gzeira Shabbat that Asham Tali, we learn out Asham Tali from Hasham Meila is that has to be worth 2 slayim. Says the Gemara, this is only answered in every Asham where it says the word Be'ekecha, like by Asham Tali, Asham Zeles. By those places it says Be'ekecha. So we learn out with Gzei Shava from Hasham Meila that has to be worth 2 slayim. How about the Asham Shivcha Charuf, the Leiksib Be'ekecha? Asham Shivcha Charuf, where it doesn't say the word Be'ekecha, what are you going to then say? How do we know there has to be worth 2 slayim? After the Gemara, according to Rabbi Akiva Kama, we learn out this din of Asham Shivcha from a different Gzei Shava. It says Be'el. By Pasha Shivcha it says Be'el Asham. By Pasha Asham Eilis it says V'koyin Yichapa Alav. Be'ela Asham, and we learn out Asham Shivcha has to be worth 2 slayim and Gzei Shava from Asham Eilis. Zog the Gemara Chatus v'nolam the Baya itself, but what do we know that a Chatus has to be slaughtered b'tzafin? And the Gemara B'chsid, because it says v'shachat es hachatus by the shchita. How do we know it has to be b'tzafin? It says v'shachat es hachatus b'mkayim ha'ila. We learned before that the shchita of the chatus has to be in the place of the ha'ila, which is b'tzafin. So we know the shchita of the chatzah has to be mitzvah, ashcha and shchita. You found a market for slaughtering mitzvah, the Kabbalah Saddam and Allah. How do we know that has to be done mitzvah? And after the immediately after the shchita of a shachatz chatzah from Kayayla, it says v'lakach hakoyin midama. And this lekicha is obviously going on Kabbalah Saddam, like we had before. We learned in Teres Kainim. It says v'lakach hakoyin. And that by a regular carbon, and it says so just like the Kabbalah Saddam by Meisha was beklisharis l'seicha agogis, so to lekicha that says by the regular Kabbalah has to be beklisharis, but we see that lakach means Kabbalah Saddam. And because of the smichas of the psukim of shchita to Kabbalah, and just like by shchita it says mitzafin, and the Kabbalah is written right next to the shchita, so that's how we know it's mitzafin. So how do we know the kohen is being the Kabbalah dam that he has to be standing mitzafin? It says in the pasuk v'lakach. V'lakach, you can read, you break up the word, is lo yikach, he should take himself. The kohen should take himself to the place of the dam, meaning he should stand in the place where the dam has to be received, which is mitzvah. We find that the mitzvah of shchita and kabbalas hadam that has to be mitzvah as a mitzvah. Lakiv, how do we know that it holds back from the kapara even with the evet? Where do we know that? Because it says another pasuk by Karim Chatas that the Nasri, the Sir Nasri, the king had brought he should slaughter in the place where they slaughtered the Eilah. Where was the Eilah Yishachta? Mitzafin. It was in the north. Avzeh, so too, the Sir Nasi, Shchinas Matzafin. So this, the Sir Nasi is also slaughtered Matzafin. So this is where you learn out Shchitas of a leader is mitzvah, it's already included in all the other chatois. It says, and Sir Nasi is included in chatas. Oh, Lama Yatsa, why did you sing aloud Sir Nasi? After you want from this, that the Torah is singing out Nasi, to designate a place that it has to be dafki mitzvah to tell you, Shin Le Shach, that if you didn't shach it, and the north apostle will hold back the kapara. You're saying that's why they sing aloud Sir Nasi to teach us the din that safin is ma'akim b'shchitase. Or perhaps maybe he's coming to teach you a different din. Shazet ton safin that after Sir Nasi needs to be slaughtered with safin as a mitzvah. The ain achit ton safin, but any other chatas does not have to be. At something, there's no mitzvah at all. Talmud Leimer comes the pasuk and says, he didn't have to say the word hachatas. He should have said v'shachat oisim b'mkayim ha'ila. The pasuk is talking already about hachatas. So as hachatas is extra. What does he come to tell us? Zebanav. This is come to tell you binyan av. From here we learn out l'chol hachatayis sheyeho tonas suffering, that all the other chatayis need to be slaughtered with suffering. So to tell you that it's a mitzvah by all other chatayis, that it's only by seer nasi and not by other chatayis, that's impossible. So you can't say he's coming to exclude other seer izim. Obviously, he's come to teach us the din that suffering is ma'akev by seer nasi. Says you find a makev for shchita with suffering, seer nasi mitzvah ma'akev. We already learned from the pasuk by seer nasi also la'akev. Shar chatayis nami ashkechan lamitzvah. Other chatayis you learn that there's a mitzvah to slaughter with suffering. But la'akev and nalan, how do we know that if he doesn't do with suffering, it's ma'akev the carbon? After you want to chsiv and chizba with chsiv seira, b'seira. The Torah should have said the din of suffering just by Sira season. And that would have been enough. I would have learned Kizba from this. So why did he write Kizba? Obviously to tell you that the Shechita with suffering is ma'akev by all chatayis. So once you want to clarify that, from where do we know that Shechita with suffering by all chatayis is at ma'akev? So now he goes to the pasuk of Shachat Oisei Eloisei Lamali. What is the word Oisei? Since we know all the chatayis are slaughtered with suffering, and we're not dashing Oisei, so what do we have to? Why do we need the word Oisei? What do like Tanya? We need to like we learned to learn Oisei. Oisei about suffering. We say Nachshon about suffering. We learn out the Sir Chatas that Nachshon ben Aminadav, who was the leader of Shevet Yehuda b'Chnukas HaMishkan, and so too all the other Sir Chatois that the Nishar Navim brought, which wasn't as a sin, wasn't brought for a sin like regular Chatas, so that their Shechita wasn't Batzaf and Dafka. So why do we need this Tasha? Tanya, we learned from Abraham with Samach Yad Ha'Reish HaSayir. It says Ha'Reish HaSayir, the word is extra, because the Torah should have said Ha'Reish. So what do we learn out? To teach us that Sirich HaTorah Shal Anisim did need smicha. Those are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. It comes to teach us that the Sirich that was brought for idol worship needs smicha. And really, the Sirich according to the Shita Rabbi Yehuda, he says the pasuk is coming to include here nachshen l'smicha. So that's why you need an oisai to exclude it from shechita batzafin. I would have thought since the pasuk included sir nachshen b'negei to smicha, I would have also included b'negei to the concept of shechita batzafin. Kamash malan. That's why the pasuk oisai comes to tell you exclusion. No, Sir Nachshon doesn't need to be Batzofin. Maskar Avina is the Shail Hanich Rabbi Yehuda. That is Ma'abes Sir Nachshon L'Smicha. So that's why I need a pasuk to exclude from Shechita. But Rabbi Shimon, that is not Ma'abes Sir Nachshon L'Smicha, Ma'ich L'Meima. Why did he have to exclude Sir Nachshon from the Tzafin, from the Din of Tzafin, that doesn't need Shechita there? Since it wasn't either included for smicha, it was a whole different carbon. It's not even like in the get of achatas. Why would I ever think that it has to be bit suffering if it doesn't even have the din of smicha? Malay masutra, Rabbi Yehuda nami nicha. No, Rabbi Yehuda nami nicha. According to Rabbi Yehuda, this dashi is mir Shabbos. According to him, is also a shaila. You said, oh, you need oisai, because once you included smicha, I would have included that it needs to be bit suffering. Says, who says? I can say to what it was included, that's what it was included for. Anything that it was not included was not included. Why would I need Isa to exclude it? I would say automatically it's not including the din suffering. And so I would never thought that's here. Nasha needs suffering. If you're going to say, and if you'll say, oh, if I wouldn't have had the miyut of Oisei, I would have learned that with a binyan av that says earlier, that the din tzafin is by all chatois, and Sir Nachshon was also chatos. And that's why I need to exclude it. In case smicha gufates b'binyanav. If so, why do I need a pasuk to include smicha? By the Sir Nachshon, I can learn it out with a binyanav. It says v'samach es yod al reish hachatos. So why did it have to say hachatos? It should have said al reish, which is mashma. The pasuk is teaching us every chatos needs smicha. So why do I need a special pasuk to include Sir Nachshon? Elementarius like Amrina says, I wouldn't have learned Sir Nachshon because that carbon that carbon I wouldn't learn it out from a binyan because that was only Haydai Shah, it was only for that generation, but not for any other time. Al-Khanami, so too, for Gemara also now in Yom Negate it didn't suffer Medeiros like Amrina. We don't learn out from Medeiros. For something Haydai Shah, we don't learn out from the regular Chatayis. So what do I need the pasuk I say to exclude that it doesn't have a din tzafin? Says only the carbon itself has to be b'tzafin b'shashchitas, but the sheikh doesn't have to stand b'tzafin. If he wants, he can stand b'darim and stick his hand towards tzafin and sheikh. Sheikh and Rabbi Achia nafka, fact what it dins that a sheikh doesn't have to stand b'tzafin. We already learned out from another drasha. The Tanya we learned Rabbi Zevachim Ima. Shachtai Sayar Chametz Beit Tzafin. Why does he have to say Shachat Oisei? What's the Oisei come to teach us Lefisha Metzino? Because we find that the Kohen has to be Oim with Tzafin and Mekabel with Tzafin. He has to be, when it comes to Kabbalah Sadam, he has to stand with Tzafin and receive with Tzafin. If he stood in Darim and received the blood and Tzafin, it's going to be puzzle. So Yachal Avza Kain, I would have thought, by Shchita the din should be the same. That's why it says Oisai to tell us that by Eilam, and the same thing by Chatos, that it's come to tell you, and you don't need an additional miyut by Pasha Nasi to tell you that he only the carbon has to be b'tzafin, or the blood has to be b'tzafin, or the shchit has to be b'tzafin, but the sheikh himself doesn't have to be b'tzafin. So we're back to square one. What do we need the Isai by Sir Nasi? This is why we need the Isai b'tzafin ain't ben oif b'tzafin. That the malika of a oif that was done with the Kohen Gadol's nail doesn't have to be b'tzafin. And the Gemara will explain why do we need this miyut? Why would I thought that does have to be mitzafin? The Gemara will tell you because we learned from Raisa. Ben Oiv Tom mitzafin. I would have thought a ben Oiv has to be mitzafin medinhu, and it's a kavachem amab ben senslei kavalei koyin. Ma dach by sheep b'shchitrase the shchitza behema will come kasha even by azar. You don't need that the sheikhet should be a koyin. You don't even. Nevertheless, kavalei tzafin. Nevertheless, he said the shchit is not kosher only if it's mitzafin. So it became ben oiv, which is even more chamor. Because the only one day shachta oiv is with melikas shekavalei akayin only akayin. Ain't a din sheikavalei tzafin. Shouldn't I say you need tzafin? It has to be dafka north. That's why Isa tells you. I say mitzafin, but a ben oiv, meaning a behema has to be mitzafin, not a ben oiv. Mal ben sayin shekin kavalei kli, but ben sayin the shchit is not kosher only with a knife, and also the kabbalah zadam dafke be kli sharis. By ben oiv, you don't need a knife, nor do you need a kli. So what do I need the oisei to exclude the oiv from din tzafin? Rather, he's coming to tell you that the shchita of a common person doesn't have to be mitzafin, and he want to explain why do we need this? Why would I thought the common Pesach needs to be mitzafin? The Tanya, Rabbi Lesban Yaakov Ema Yachyei Pesach Tadman Safin Dinhu. I would have thought the Pesach has the Pesach has to be with something with a kavachim. Ma oil came like kavav loy zman shchit lishchit hasim matachayla. They didn't set a zman for shchita. It could be slaughtered the whole day. It doesn't have a says a set time. Kavav loy tzafin. Nevertheless, you established tzafin. Pesach shekavav loy zman shchitase. A Pesach could only be shachta by Yudal b'nisim ben ha'abayim. So it's more chamor. Ein adin sheikol tzafin shouldn't have to also be b'tzafin. That's why you need Eisrei to exclude Pesach from tzafin. In fact, you might have Eila shekin kol. Eila is more chamor because it's completely burnt. Mashenka burnt. Mashenka Pesach only a part is burnt. Says Gemara, you're right. So menchatas, we can still learn out with a kavachem from chatas, which is not kolil, it's not completely burnt. No matter chatas doesn't have his man kavua l'shchitasa. And you said tzafin, Pesach that has his man kavua l'shchitasa, for sure it should be b'tzafin. In fact, you want to malachatas, shekenim mechaparis akol chayove krisus. It's even forgives on averis which b'mezid it would be chayav karis. That's why it should be b'tzafin. Pesach, which is not kares, how do we know? Which is more lenient one, how do you know it needs to be b'tzafin? So the one you're right, Masham. We can learn out with a kavachim for Asham that it's not mechaper achayave krisis. Ma the chosam Asham doesn't have any set time for his shchita. Nevertheless, you said tzafin. You said that there has to be done with tzafin. Pesach, which has a zman kabul for his shchita, shouldn't have to be on the tzafin side. So if you want to mahal Asham, it's more chamer than Pesach. You can kachim. It has it's in the get of kachim. That's why it has to be b'tzafin. Pesach is considered as kachim kalam. And you want to add mikula nami, and even if you're going to learn the din safin b'Pesach from all of them together, from oile chatas and asham, with atzad hashava, you can shlug up malakum shem chamurim sheikein kachim. They're all kachim versus the Pesach is kachim kalam. So what do we see? That the whole kavachim is mufrich. So there's no need to exclude carbon Pesach. It doesn't need to be b'tzafin. So the kasha is, what do I need the word oisei? I want to make it. Really, like we said before, oisei b'tzafin and sheikh b'tzafin. He, meaning the carbon itself has to be b'tzafin, not the sheikh. The kasha of medibri Rabbi Achia nafkalan. We learned out from Rabbi Achia, from the dasha of Rabbi Achia, of the oisei b'eila. So it says, lavlam yutu sheikh b'tzafin. I didn't need the Ikamir to exclude that the Sheikh doesn't have to stand b'tzafin. Because this thing already we learned out from the Dasha Rabbi Achia. The Miyud, B'sir Nasri, you needed for another thing that you can, that what? That ain't Sheikh b'tzafin, Abu Makabal Adam, Chayv Lam b'tzafin. To tell us the Ika of the Dasha, Eis b'tzafin, ain't Sheikh b'tzafin, was not needed to say ain't Sheikh b'tzafin. Only to teach us Dafkish Sheikh doesn't need to be b'tzafin. But by Kabbalah Saddam, he has to be standing b'tzafin. Mekabel, that has to stand b'tzafin, how do we know? Milakach, loy kach nafka. We learned it already, that it has to be the by Kabbalah Saddam from tzafin, and tzafin. Where do we know that? Because it says vilakach, and we read it loikach. He should take himself to the place where the blood is sprayed. So that means he has to the mekabel adam has to be b'tzafin. I mean, the Gemara lakach loikach loimashmalei. He doesn't dash on loikach. He doesn't hold up this turning around the letters of the word and making it into a drasha. So you want to ashkan l'shchita b'tzaf ba'ila l'mitzah. We found by shchita by Eila that it's a mitzvah that has to be b'tzafin. And we learned Eilas Baka from Eilas Tzayin with the Vav HaMaisif, Ve'im. Kabbalah Nami L'mitzvah Ashkechan. And Kabbalah that it has to be Kabbalah Saddam, that it has to be L'chatchil b'tzafin. And the Kabbalah has to be b'tzafin. But shchita v'kabbalah la'akiv b'nolam. How do we know that it wasn't done b'tzafin, that it holds back the kapara? Amar Avada B'Rav Abba, Item Rav Bar Shila, Kavachema. We learn out from Kavachema. Uma Chatas Haba Mikay Chayla. Ma Chatas, the din of Chatas, that it needs to be mitzofin, was not said b'feidish. Rather, it was only learned out from Oila b'mekayma Oila me'akeves. Nevertheless, it holds back from the kashrus of the carbon. Oila shaba chatas mekaycha, the Oila itself, from where you chatas is learned from. And they didn't shema'akeves. Shouldn't it be that it's ma'akev the carbon if it was not done mitzofin? So the Gemara slugs up, Malachatas. Chatas is more chamash. It can be mechaparis al chayav krisis. That it can be mechaper on all chayav krisis. Versus ha'ila is only mechaper on the mitzvah say. So maybe it doesn't have the din of something that's ma'akev. This was the kasha of Rav Ada bar Abba. I'm going to stop over here and we'll continue tomorrow.